What's up, my channel? It is your friendly neighborhood sassy blonde writer here, coming at you with some writing advice. Today I'm going to be talking about how to be a good beta reader. What is a beta reader? What do they look for when they're reading? And how can you make sure you have a good one? If you follow me on Instagram, you probably already know that I recently went through beta reading boot camp through the Young Writers Initiative, which I will link to down below. They are a great service. I swear to God, I'm not sponsored by them. I just really love what they do. They're a great service. They help authors and writers who are under the age of 25, and they have a literary journal. They do everything from personal essays to poetry to flash fiction to short stories, pretty much everything in their literary journal. They also provide editing services. They help you get beta readers, and they go through a certain training course called Beta Reading Bootcamp, which I just recently completed. And they do this all on a volunteer basis, which is great because then it's at no cost to the writer, because especially if you're younger, you probably don't have the kind of money needed to shell out for, say, a freelance editor, especially if it's your first draft and you just want to get somebody else's opinion about it. So I highly recommend it and eligible to get there. Now you're probably wondering, what is a beta reader? So this term is tossed around a lot in AuthorTube community. I never really heard of it until I started watching like Jenna Moressi's videos. So a beta reader is basically, it's a lot what it sounds like. If something is in beta, that means it's not in its completely polished form, and you're trying to get feedback from people before it's in its final development. This is commonly used in the gaming world, where if a game is in beta, that means it's not quite done yet, but they released it a little early to figure out what players are looking for. It's a similar concept, just applied to reading. So a beta reader is the first person to read your novel usually before you try to submit it for publication, if you're doing traditionally published, or before it's in its final round of edits, before it goes to an editor if you're doing the self-published version. A lot of time what authors will do is they will make a Google form for their beta readers. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's strangers, sometimes it's fans of theirs who they get through Patreon. One thing I really like about the Young Writers Initiative is that you can kind of have a mix of both. If you recruited your own beta readers, they can go through boot camp, and the Young Writers Initiative will just kind of take care of all the administrative stuff. So all you have to do is send your chapters and then get feedback on them and apply that to your work, which I think is just super helpful. Sometimes people do beta reading in chunks where they give them a chapter or a chunk of chapters, usually like probably 4 to 5, and they get rolling feedback as the people read the book. Or you could just give them the whole manuscript and be like, read it, tell me what you think. A lot of times beta readers will also give feedback in the actual document. A lot of times you do it through Google Docs or you do it through Microsoft Word, where they can make comments on different things. Sometimes they get into the nitty-gritty of stuff. Sometimes it's just overall plot analysis. But it's super helpful to get both the Google form feedback and the comments feedback as well, because they will be able to help you sometimes with things that you didn't pick up on, like a tense change. If you go from first person present to first person past tense, so it may or may not be something that I do a lot. Or if you switch point of views, they will be the people who catch it. The important thing to remember is that when you're getting a beta reader, or if you are being a beta reader, you want to remember you're not editing. It's not your job necessarily to fix spellings or make suggestions for the deep cuts that an author may or may not have to do. That's not what the beta reader's job is. The editor is the one who goes through everything with a fine-tooth comb. The beta reader is giving the author the reader's experience while they are looking at their book. Now, that being said, there are definitely things you want to see in a beta reader and things you may not be too fond of with the beta reader. So I'm here to kind of go through what my experience with the boot camp was, and some of the feedback that I got, and things you want to keep in mind while you are beta reading. Now, this can be helpful for authors who are looking to get beta readers, and this can also be helpful for someone who wants to become a beta reader but isn't really sure what that job entails. So remember, when you're a beta reader, your main concern is the development of the story. You're not really thinking about grammar unless it's something glaring or something that might not be picked up by the author the first time around. Your main concerns want to be the following. Is your character fleshed out? Could the characterization be improved? How well is the world building? Does the pacing and conflict seem realistic? Is there a lot of confusion while you're reading? Were there any scenes that seemed unnecessary or just did not make sense? Remember, your feedback as a beta reader should be focused on the development of the story. Again, you're not here to critique their writing style. You're not here to tell them what you would do instead. That's kind of rude anyway. You're here to tell them about the development of the story. Is it moving too slow? Is it moving too fast? Are there scenes that don't really need to be there? Are there characters who maybe could be combined with a different character? Is there one character that has too much going on and needs to be split up? That sort of thing. You want to give an accurate review and portrayal of the different characters. Don't sugarcoat it, but also be nice about it, if that makes sense. You're writing from the reader's perspective, which is kind of like what you do when you review a book on Goodreads or Amazon. Remember, authors, the reviews are not for you. The reviews are for the readers. So you kind of want to think of it like that, but then with a teaching point of view, if that makes any sense. You want to make sure when you are beta reading that you give constructive criticism. Don't be mean when you're giving criticism to someone. This also goes for critique partners and editors as well. Don't just be mean and be like, this is a hot piece of garbage you typed right here. That's mean. Nobody's gonna be able to improve from that because one, it's it doesn't really address any specific issues. What is garbage? It's a subjective term. Garbage to you may be different from garbage to me. Hot steaming pile of garbage. Very descriptive, but also not clear what that means. Why is it garbage? What could they do to make it not be garbage? Think of these questions as you are beta reading. So as a beta reader, you have a little checklist that you're going to want to make sure you go through. You want to make sure that first things first, you want to talk about the plot. Does the plot make sense with the world they've built up around it? Is there proper foreshadowing? Do any of the plot points kind of come out of nowhere? One thing I always try to keep in mind when I'm beta reading, and also just when I'm consuming any type of entertainment, is could the plot have easily been fixed by X? A lot of times in fiction, there's a lot that could be fixed if the characters would simply talk to each other. If your entire plot hinges on one character not having a conversation with another character, you might want to consider coming up with other reasons for that. You also are looking out for plot holes, parts of the plot that just kind of come out of nowhere. Other type of plot holes include illogical events. The all-powerful villain can be thrown off by dumping water on their head. Wizard of Oz. Contradictions. Contradictions usually refer to a character's personality. An example of a contradiction would be The Hunger Games in Mockingjay, spoiler alert, where Katniss goes from wanting to fight for justice so nobody has to go in the Hunger Games again to completely changing at the end of the book where she's like, no, I think we should do the Hunger Games again, but this time with all the rich people. That's a complete contradiction of everything that happened in the book leading up to that. For the record, I read this book like 8 years ago and I'm still annoyed by it. Another plot hole you want to look out for are unresolved storylines. Example would be in 2020. This is actual live events. Unresolved storyline would be the murder hornets that we heard about in the news one day and then literally never came up again. Are there murder hornets still out? Do we really have that much to worry about? We'll never know, will we? Because it's freaking 2020. Another thing you always want to watch out for when you're beta reading is continuity errors. Continuity errors can exist in one form where a character conveniently forgets an important piece of information when they need it the most, or doesn't have something that they would normally have. An example that comes up a lot is in horror movies where all of a sudden the main character doesn't have their phone with them when they really should call the police and not go into the scary building. Another example of a continuity error is when it seems like the character just kind of pulls something out of thin air. So a continuity error is where something is happening in one scene and then it's not happening in another, or vice versa. So I think the best example would be in a popular movie where once in one scene, in like the same overall scene, in one take, a character is like holding a brownie and about to eat it while talking to the other character, and in the next scene, the brownie is actually on a plate. They weren't holding it, or something just disappears randomly. So that's something to keep an eye out for when you are reading. That might not be something that the author realizes they did the first time around, so if you point that out to them, it's usually a really easy fix. Continuity errors can also be with familial relationships. All of a sudden, they go from being a single parent to being a married parent. All of a sudden, they randomly have a sister they just pulled out of thin air. Time continuity is also something that can be a really big issue in novels, and also I find in movies as well, where it's like, okay, it's the middle of the night. Why doesn't it look like that? Time and place continuity specifically are very difficult because you want to make sure that you're pinning down exactly where they are. They didn't just jump from being in the middle of town and having a conversation about the mystery to being in their bedroom and then having to leave the house that they're in to go to the store or something like that. You want to make sure that everything has continuity. In my first novel I ever tried to write, I actually had a lot of issues with place continuity, which is something I feel like doesn't get addressed enough. Normally it's just time continuity, like time of day. Is it lunchtime? Is it evening? Is it the middle of the night? Whatever. But I think place continuity is also really difficult. I think that also falls into white room syndrome, which is also something you want to look into when you are beta reading, because you want to make sure that you can actually picture where these people are. Are they in a white room or are they in a garden? You want to make sure you're dropping little hints and keep referencing the room that they're in. Another example of continuity is there magically a table that appears even though they're in the middle of the desert? Is there significant change in the weather that wouldn't really make sense given the time of year? Is your story set in the summer and all of a sudden it starts snowing? Is their stomach growling even though they literally just ate breakfast? You also want to make sure that there is character backstory continuity as well. This is something that a lot of TV shows usually mess up somewhere along the line, is character backstory continuity. For example, Gilmore Girls. Now, I love the show Gilmore Girls, but there are some continuity errors in that as well. For example, you start off with finding out Lorelai and Rory moved to Stars Hollow when Lorelai ran away from her family when Rory was about 1 year old. Then in a different episode, we find out that they moved into the house when Rory was 8. Then in a different episode, no, she wasn't actually 8, she was like 10 years old, etc. So that's an example of something you want to keep track of when you are beta reading, because it's really difficult when you're, especially if you're fast drafting like for NaNoWriMo or something like that, it's really difficult to keep them all straight. You also want to make sure that the characters are staying true to themselves. If the protagonist is something completely out of character in one scene, you want to make sure you raise that question with the author of if that was intentional. If it seems like a character suddenly went from being this nice, amiable person to being a huge jerk to everyone they meet, you want to make sure that the author may not have intended for them to come across that way, or the story is kind of missing a piece in between that shift in demeanor with that character. You want to make sure you raise that question. Another thing you want to make sure that you keep in mind when you are beta reading is character motivation. What keeps this character going in this chapter? Why are they doing any of this? Did their character motivation change? Does their character motivation make sense to begin with? Was it even established in the chapter, or do you have no idea why the character is doing any of this stuff? You also want to pay attention to pacing, dramatic tension, conflict, and characterization. Those are things that you definitely want to keep in mind that I kind of already covered. Pacing is really important because if you as a beta reader are starting to get bored, it is not rude to tell the author about that. If you think things are starting to drag or things are moving too quickly and you're not sure what's happening, you want to make sure you tell the author that. Dramatic tension is also one of the key things that makes a scene powerful. So if there's no dramatic tension, or the dramatic tension isn't really clear, you want to point that out to the author as well. And conflict as well. Characterization usually falls into the category of show, don't tell. You don't want to just hear that the protagonist is nice, you want to see them be nice, or a little bit juicier. You don't want to just hear about what a jerk the antagonist is, you want to see them be a jerk. You want to see them like kick puppies and stuff and find out why they're being a jerk. So if you notice that there's a situation where there's showing, not telling, or there's just not very clear character motivation or conflict or dramatic tension, you want to make sure you point that out to the author. Overall structure, setting, and world building are also things that you want to make sure you look out for. How different is the world that they're trying to build, the world building, from the world we live in nowadays? Are they trying to make things different? Are they trying to make it similar? Do they have confusing and conflicting elements in their world building? Do you really not have a picture of what's going on? Did they spend 5 pages talking about their carrot-based economy when they really should have been talking about how the royal family has started? As a beta reader, you also want to look out for dialogue. You want to make sure the dialogue actually sounds like how people talk. This is something that can be really difficult, especially for newer writers. So the more specific you are about the issues with dialogue, or you see a lot of dialogue tags and it makes it really confusing, or on the other side, if you don't see a lot of dialogue tags and you're genuinely not sure which character is speaking at which point, you want to make sure you tell the author that. Point of view is also something that you should definitely be watching out for. Is there a lot of head hopping going on, and does it actually enhance the story, or does it make it more confusing? So if you notice a continuity error there with the name of the character, or you notice the change in tense or point of view, or you notice that they're kind of hopping around all over the place, you want to explain to the author that this is confusing for the reader because X. When you are beta reading, you want to make sure you go through in detail what are the issues and what are the good things that you notice. For every bad thing, you want to at least point out one good thing, because as someone who's been on both sides of this, I can say, if you're not specific with your critical feedback, it's really difficult to work those issues into your edits. And also if all you get are things pointing out flaws in your manuscript, it can be really, really spirit breaking. So make sure you point out the good things as well. When you are beta reading, you're also probably going to be asked what your impressions of the chapter were. So your impressions of the chapter mean your overall feeling about the chapter. Were you bored while you were reading it? Were you really engaged with what was happening but a little confused? You want to try to be as specific as possible with what your feeling was. Don't just go, I liked it. That's not helpful. What did you like about it? You also don't want to say, I didn't like it. Then again, you want to be helpful. You want to use specific adjectives to talk about your feelings about the chapter. You're usually going to be asked about your thoughts on specific characters as well. Did they have a notable voice? Were you able to picture them in your mind? Did you feel a certain character was necessary to the story or could be completely cut out, etc.? You also want to tell them if any of the parts of the plot or the chapter were unclear and have them name the specific parts. You want to give them your initial thoughts when you were reading the chapter and tell them which scenes were clear and which scenes were unclear and why. Why does there need to be more clarity in this particular scene? Would it help you picture what's going on? Would it help you identify how the character's feeling and their motivation? Would it help with characterization? Would it help establish world building and setting, etc.? That's all I got for you today on how to be a good beta reader. I will be sure to document on my beta reading journey what I've noticed are good practices for beta readers, what are bad practices for beta readers, and how you as the author can incorporate your beta reading feedback. That's all I got for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have been a beta reader before, please let me know in the comments any tips I missed. If you have been on the other side and been the author with beta readers, what are things you look for in your beta readers' feedback that is really helpful for you? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more sassy blonde content from your sassy blonde writer. Bye!